Good morning, everybody. Welcome to another episode of It Is Written. These videos are to equip and encourage the believer to continue to do what God has called you to do. In today's episode, we're talking about faith, and we're coming out of the book of Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 8. And it says, "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, for it is a gift from God." For those of you who have been walking in faith for quite some time, you understand that faith is an important part of our Christian life. You also understand that miraculously, somehow, the Lord uses the faith that He has given us to provide salvation for us. Now, I know that can get confusing. So, let's go to Hebrews chapter 11, starting in verse 1. And this is what it says, that faith is the assurance of things hoped for and the conviction of things unseen. So, within the Bible, the authors lay out many different things we are to hope for, right? But our penultimate hope should be in the fact that Jesus Christ is the Messiah and that He's going to return. So that Hebrews verse has some really strong language. It says that having faith is something that we should be assured of. We need to be confident that Jesus is who He says He is. And Jesus calls Himself God. In John chapter 10, starting in verse 30, we see this encounter that Jesus has with the Jews. And He says, "I and the Father are one." And the Jews knew exactly what He meant by this. Actually, in verse 33, the Jews become irate. They say, "We're going to stone you because you, being a man, made yourself equal to God." Now, hopefully you are following me. We need to have a confidence, or rather what Hebrews says, a conviction that Jesus is God. Now, that is going to take some time. Myself, along with every other Christian who has not lived in the first century, which means you as well, have not seen Jesus with our own eyes. Meaning our faith is going to have to be built with time and experiences, highs and lows that we might have walking this life out. And trust me, that confidence you have in God eventually will turn into a conviction of the things unseen. Now let's go back to the first verse, Ephesians chapter 2, starting in verse 8. "For by grace you have been saved through faith, and this is not your own doing, but it's a gift of God." Now, I really like the second half of that verse. Actually, in Revelation chapter 2, we learn a little bit of dirt about Ephesus. So we find out in this chapter that Ephesus, although they were doing all these miraculous things for the kingdom, end up loving their work more than loving Christ. So this verse right here in Ephesians 2, verse 8, is more of a warning to us not to get big-headed, not to forget who given us faith. With that, it's now time for some A&T. It's a little corny. A&T number 1, Jesus is God. And because He's God, He has the power to save souls. A&T number 2, faith takes time. A Christian life is like any other life in regards to the ups and downs you may go through in your emotional and mental state. As Big Crit once says, the more you walk with God, the harder it is to scrape your knee. And that is true. The more we commune with God, the easier and stronger our faith will become. A&T number 3, faith and salvation are all gifts from God. Don't wound up like Ephesus and forget your first love because you're too focused on your works. Remember, God has gifted us with faith. Hopefully this video was encouraging to you. Tune in same time next week for It Is Written.